Hi guys, welcome back to day 2 of my countdown of my top 20 favorite films of all time. Let's not waste any time and let's get right into number 19. Number 19. Martyrs. This is a French horror film which I first watched a couple years ago with a few friends. We saw the DVD at a convention we went to. I think it was a fan expo. I want to say 2009 or 2010, sometime in that area. We bought it and we brought it back to our friend's place and we watched it. And I think the copy we had was actually a French. It wasn't a dubbed version, so it was all subtitles, which I didn't mind all that much. So it was pretty good. But now I have a dubbed copy of it, and I have it on DVD with a dub. So the dub I would say is pretty good. I think there's voice actors I recognize, like from anime and stuff, but there's no credits for the voice actors who did the English dub, so I can't verify if they're the people I think I'm hearing. But I definitely think Wendy Lee is in there. For anybody who knows who Wendy Lee is, she's the voice actress who's most well known for playing Faye Valentine in Cowboy Bebop. And anyways, getting back to the movie, I've sidetracked again. Martyrs is a horror film that is incredibly hard to watch. It's the type of horror film where you have to have a stomach for physical violence. Unfortunately, this is a film that involves a lot of torture. And I know what a lot of people immediately think. They immediately think, oh, it's a torture porn film, so it's all about just blood and guts, and it has no substance whatsoever. That's where it kind of it's not what you think it is. Martyrs to me does torture porn in all the ways that Hostel and the later Saw films and some of the reboots of recent horror films get very wrong. And that is that the torture has a point. It is very intrinsic in the plot as to why there's torture going on. And in defense of it, it's kind of hard to talk about without giving away spoilers of this movie, so I guess the only thing I can really say in advance is that, the torture has a huge part into how this film ends. It's what drives the characters essentially to do what they do, and it also gives a huge part of the backstory of one of the main characters. It's part of the development curve of one of the female leads. Basically, how the movie starts off is you have a little girl you have a younger girl who's around a teenager who escapes this sort of warehouse where it looks like she's been tortured for a while, and she runs off to an orphanage and she befriends another little girl, and you realize over time she's developing hallucinations and she's seeing things based on her time when she was tortured. And so she grows up and she wants vengeance against the people who tortured her. So she goes to this house and she kills the family that's there, and she's absolutely certain that the adults in the house are the ones who were responsible for torturing her. So she exacts her revenge, and basically the rest of the movie is her kind of still having hallucinations and all this kind of stuff, and her friend comes and helps her, and eventually her friend ends up in the same situation that she was in when she was a teenager, and so she gets tortured as well. But the thing is, this movie does end with not necessarily a happy ending, because it's not really a happy ending, because the people who we are rooting for do not necessarily end up in a very good place. But it is a movie that kind of forces a little bit of thought into your brain by the time you get to, the last 20 minutes or so. This isn't an incredibly long movie. I'd say about maybe 2/3 of the movie so basically the first and second act are just us getting acquainted with the two girls, the two leading females, who they are, what their situation is, and how all of this has basically come to fruition, and what the backstory is. And then at the end of the second act, leading into the third act, you basically are given the big reveal as to why this organization is doing what they're doing to these women, and for the rest of the film, despite the fact that there's torture going on, you're kind of looking at it a little bit differently, and you're looking at it in this way where it's like, what would cause a person to all of us to go through this, and how does it work? And you start looking for little things that are a little bit more outside of just cringing and or cheering because there's torture. I mean, there is it's almost pretentious to think this, but there is a deeper meaning to the torture that's going on. I don't really want to give too much else away, because I think if anybody who likes horror films and is okay with stomaching that kind of stuff, then I would really recommend watching this film. Unfortunately, this film is going to be remade in the next little bit, and with an American studio and American actors, and I'm not looking forward to it because the French version was done so well, and the French version was only done within, I think, the last 5 years. I think it came out in 2008 or something, so it's very recent. And it astounds me that it's being remade already. I'm just like, leave it well enough alone. It's a good film. It has a good dub. Just leave it be. Do you really need to make a remake just because your audience doesn't want to read subtitles and they don't want to watch a dubbed version? Like, grr. In any case, the thing I think most attracts me to this movie is the relationship between the two female leads. I think there's a common thread with some movies I like, and this idea that female relationships are very hard to find and very hard to write well in film. For the most part, women don't really get the same representation in film, I think, the way that men do. I mean that in the way that when you write friendships between men, there's this sense that men are easier to write and they are more geared towards the general viewing audience, whereas you have female friendships that are just written for women and they do not appeal to any other demographic other than women. But, there's the default and then there's the deviation from the default, if I can quote Nostalgia Chick. But the thing about Martyrs is that with the scenario that's been put in front of us, it is one of those movies that does manage to come up with a very good female dynamic friendship that can appeal to not only women, but it also appeals to men. And if anything, I think it appeals more to men because there is a slight, let's say, lesbian undertone of the film, but for the most part, it is mainly a platonic kind of love. One of the girls, if anything, acts more like a loving mother to the other girl, or an older sister, because she tends to take care of her and she tends to mother her almost, and she protects her, and they do so much for each other in this film where it's like, it's so hard to find female friendships like that in film and in television in general, because it seems like women are so much harder to write than people think. I give the movie major props for that. One of the main things about the movie that I think really attracts me to it is the ending itself. And if I'm going to go into spoilers at this point, because if anybody who isn't interested in seeing the movie and doesn't care about spoilers, you can just watch this and you'll know how it ends. Basically, how it ends, what happens exactly, and how this is all explained or why the torture is going on. There's an organization of these incredibly wealthy but sort of geriatric people who want to know what happens after we die. And so what happens is they hold these basically experiments and torture women, because women seem to be more susceptible to this, because they have a theory: if they are tortured to such an extent that they are suffering such pain and such anguish that they can actually see into the afterlife, and they see it before they die. And so they all have a similar look on their face, and so they've been trying to have the same experience, and they've been trying to do the same thing over and over again to different women with different techniques of torture to try and get someone to reveal what happens after we die. I think that's a very interesting way of going about a torture porn film, actually having this sort of philosophical and very human reaction to this, and realizing, it's a very human feeling to want to know what happens after we die. A lot of people, including myself, fear the thought of death, the idea that there is this sort of nothingness that exists once our brains are no longer active and our bodies shut down. You know, I don't necessarily believe in an afterlife. I don't really think there is one. And that's a bit of a daunting feeling to think, you know, after this life, that's it, that we just become compost in the ground. It's a bit depressing. And so to have a movie that kind of has this very human fear attached to it, and their reaction to it is to torture other people and to basically sacrifice other human beings in order for them to find out what happens when they die, and they're sacrificing younger women too. It's like, you've lived your lives and you should have no regrets at that age, and yet these young women haven't lived full lives and they're being tortured and killed just so that they can find out what happens when we die. And of course, at the very end of the movie, the woman who's responsible for all of this, who's basically heading this organization, she is told by our female lead what happens when we die, what happens after in the afterlife, and she says it to her, and she describes it. And so the woman either has this epiphany, or she's just incredibly greedy and she doesn't want to reveal it, and so she's supposed to reveal it to all the people that have invested in this organization, but instead she locks herself in the bathroom and she puts a gun in her mouth and she kills herself. And that's just kind of how the movie ends, with this sort of big question mark over the whole thing, which I think is really nice, that you can have a movie that's that ambiguous and that's leaves this sort of open-ended question to the audience, and have a movie that is that disturbing to watch and is kind of that just grotesque to watch, and yet still leave your audience with a bit of an imposing question at the end of it. So that's my number 19 favorite film of all time. Come back tomorrow for number 18 and keep watching so you can find out what my number 1 favorite film of all time is. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you later.